developer stream. As you can see by the beautiful blank page overlay here, pretty much. We are going to potentially be talking mecha mechanics, which are among the most requested mechanics for Valor. But first, we will be addressing something else, which I don't actually have a write-up for. This is just going to be more of a discussion. We'll be talking about defeat mechanics and kind of how that works and how you can incorporate that idea into your game without, like defeating the party and then just having a game over right there. How you can keep the story moving and turn a scenario like that into something that might end up a bit interesting. So yeah, let's dive right in. So this particular request comes from our Patreon, who goes by Neko and Cardine. They are a longtime friend of the system. They've been supporting us both in play and very, very generously financially for quite a few years, even before we released. And they were our biggest backer when we actually released the hardcover. So we are very grateful to them for their continued support and happy to delve into this topic since this is what they wanted to talk about and what they wanted to ask about. So, and it really, I think, is an interesting thing to talk about because it just the idea that a defeat has to be a game over, I feel like, is something of a carryover from our roots in wargaming and in like early RPGs, early computer, early video game RPGs. Since a lot of how we design encounters, and in my opinion, is honestly a bit wrong almost. Definitely lacking in nuance. There's this idea that whenever you take the field or you get into a fight, it's a battle of life or death for both sides, and you're just going to keep wailing on each other until you've finished and until one side is just completely killed. And I don't honestly feel like that creates interesting narratives, or is it even honestly that just believable from a storyline perspective? So this is related, I promise. But kind of before we get into the defeat mechanics, first let's talk about encounter design. Since I feel like the best way, in my opinion, to avoid this is when you go into a scene, when you go into an encounter, whatever you want to call it, you should be thinking about the objective of the people who stand in opposition of the player characters. So what is this group trying to accomplish? And it may be, in some cases, that they are in fact trying to kill the player characters. PCs tend to get into a lot of trouble, and they tend to do a lot of things that make people want to end them. But more often than not, that's likely not going to be all or even part of it. In many cases, characters might come into conflict with the monster. Well, why are they in conflict with the monster? Well, the monster wants to protect its dead and wants to protect its young. Presumably, they wandered into its territory, now they gotta fight. That can end up in a life or death circumstance, but in general, you might expect a monster, much like a cornered bear or something like that. They will fight to protect their young, and in some cases they will fight to the death, but they're not really there to die, really. Like, animals, people, we all have a self-preservation instinct. It can be overridden in terms of calling great duty or fanaticism or things like that. But usually, I would say more often than not, if you're getting into a fight, the enemy should have a clear motivation and should ideally have some kind of an exit strategy where they don't intend to just throw themselves as fodder on the swords of the player characters. They actually, maybe they need to delay them for a bit, so they'll get into a fight and then they'll disengage once the delay's been achieved. Or, maybe they are trying to keep them out of an area, so they'll retreat to a more defensive enclosure, and they'll fall back if the PCs are making headway, but they won't necessarily just stay and fight to the death. A lot of things you can do with that. So With that in mind, then let's talk about defeat. Um, I know, coming from the D&D tradition, that defeat is what we call the TPK, right? The total party kill, where every character has dropped, especially with earlier editions and how unforgiving death was. Most of the characters are probably just dead already. So, that's that, game over, we're done. Newer editions of D&D, and D, and then definitely Valor, of course, they're about a lot less harsh about death. You don't just die if you get moderately low health. So we'll focus specifically on Valor. Valor, we made it intentionally very difficult to die. You need to be negative your maximum health value in order to die. That's a lot. Even a basic character that's like negative 100 something health, and considering most hits do 30-ish at level 1, someone has to try to kill you. And we designed that for a reason. A big part of Valor is if your character is going to die, considering how much time that we expect you to put into making them and customizing them, and achieving that degree of ownership over them. If your character is going to die, our goal is that you will feel like they died for a reason and that you made that choice. And that ties into the Valor mechanic, where really, if a character is going to die, more than likely what's happened is that they've spent their Valor to temporarily heal themselves, to keep getting back up after they've been knocked down, and they continue to take damage. And that's why that overdrive works that way, where we take that health back away from you after the scene. It represents a kind of going beyond your limitations and pushing past the point of no return, where you've taken so much damage and you're still fighting, but after the fact, you'll lose all that health, and then you'll probably get some dramatic dying speech before you fade out with at least one party member, sobbing over your dead body. We're going to be talking mecha, so example being a certain character in the Gurren Lagann anime. I won't necessarily spoil it, but that scene kind of plays out like that, and it's very iconic. And just that idea of someone being able to push past their limits and keep fighting, but to sacrifice their life to do so is very anime. So that's kind of why we set that up. So that in mind, PC is very durable. Many cases they're not going to get that far into a battle unless it's extremely dramatic, high personal stakes, all of that. So with that in mind, then, what are some alternatives? Well, if the PCs are fighting or are opposing a villain, there's always the capture option, where the villains will capture them, and I think even in like modern D&D, you'll see that a lot, where everyone gets knocked out and then they get captured. This is honestly, in my opinion, a very easy one to work with. If the player characters have shown themselves particularly resilient, if they have certain connections or whatever, they might make good hostages. It might just be that the enemy wants to lock them in a prison for a few hours to keep them out of the way, but isn't like really out to kill these people. All kinds of things, and I think that's a big factor from a villain perspective and motivation too. Humans, like, typically, based on at least my knowledge of the psychology, sociology, like, we all have the capacity to kill someone. It's kind of an inconvenient truth that we like to not think about, but you really gotta be like, the situation in which you would just intentionally end someone's life is special. It's unique. Like, there are certainly circumstances where that's going to come to it, but it's not really our default state. And by nature, outside of some very unfortunate counterexamples, most people aren't really looking to just kill people. Like, that's that's not really how we're wired to act. I think keeping that in mind is a good way to sort of prevent yourself from getting into this whole like, oh, I'm gonna totally just kill every single person in this party. Like you don't have to go there. Um, Another method, and this is one I've kind of picked up on from the honestly, in my opinion, quite excellent Trails series, a Legendary Heroes Trails of Cold Steel, which I've been playing an immense amount of, is setting it up so that if the player characters are in a dangerous situation, some of their allies might be on hand to bail them out. Trails, in my opinion, overuses this a lot, but in terms of using it, I think especially if you've got like a broad NPC cast, you can really dig into that and have some fun with having some powerful allies be on hand to, if it's looking bad, if the PCs are on their back foot, having someone jump in to just bail them out. It gives you a nice way to kind of show off some of these NPCs, which you can then use as a meter for growth. Where maybe these NPCs in the early game will show up and dramatically rescue the player characters, but later on it might be the player characters who are showing up and dramatically rescuing these NPCs. So that sets up some interesting potential and opportunity there, and it also just gives you ways to make the players feel grateful to these NPCs, to build that connection with the NPCs and with the player characters themselves, which honestly I think is important to do, in that ideally the player characters like the NPCs that they're supposed to like, and part of getting player characters to care about NPCs, especially in games that can get a bit transactional, which can happen in some of those very combat focused games and stuff like that. A good way to get player characters and players behind them to care about an NPC is having the NPC do something for them. Obviously, this can come up as very contrived, but if you are, for example, in a situation where you kind of eyeballed an encounter maybe, and oops, I overtuned it and I'm about to wipe the party, or your dice, or in my case, Roll20 really hates the players but really loves you, and you're coming up tens and they're coming up ones, and then suddenly this counter that they should have been able to be past this suddenly seems to be becoming quite insurmountable. It's a tool. It's a good tool to have in your toolkit to do that. Beyond that, though, some other options are they knock them out and they leave. Their goal was to stop these guys, so they're just gonna pound on them a bit and be done with it. I think honestly that's not a bad way to go. In that, and again, it goes back to motivation. If the player characters come in conflict, with an enemy, what's that enemy's objective? If the enemy, especially if the enemy has a clear-cut set objective, something that they're trying to accomplish, they're not gonna stick around and make sure that the player characters are dead or whatever. They're just gonna blast through them and move on to what they're trying to accomplish. So say their goal is to get through the player characters and get to some individual that's being protected. They're just gonna wipe the players and run forward and steal the thing, or kill the person that they actually are trying to kill, or all kinds of options there. And as the player characters become more important over time, that can certainly that motivation might shrink a bit. Where the player characters are suddenly themselves the ones who who might be the key mark, but especially kind of at the low level where I think a lot of folks really worry about this kind of thing. That's another good way to keep the players from just getting completely wiped and having to start an entirely new game. Other potential options are if you're able, and this requires the right kind of party, but if you establish in setting the idea that players or people or characters will run or will kind of act in their own interest and their own self-preservation, you might start to reach the point where players will make that judgment call to pull out. And if you can train them to do that, my hat is off to you and your GMing skills. But getting them to act with that mindset is honestly, in my opinion, not bad at all. It's actually, it gives you a lot of potential where the player characters will really start to proceed with a certain degree of caution. They won't always think that they can just bust through the door and tear through everything. They'll actually be measured about some of their choices. They'll actually, think about whether or not they should be sticking around if this guy's just wiping the floor with them. And if they run away, then so be it. The enemy can continue on attempting to achieve their objective. Running away and regrouping is also just another good way to continue a scene where, say, the player characters are set to stop this incredibly powerful individual. Instead of him just, him or her, excuse me, just wiping the floor with the player characters, it could be that they see that they're outmatched, so they're going to fall back, regroup, try and heal up a bit, come up with a new plan. Maybe they're going to start setting some traps. Maybe they're going to set up some things to impede them. There's a lot of options there. So if you can get your players into that case, into that circumstance where they're thinking about their capabilities and they understand that not every challenge might be able to be overcome with just their brute force, I think that puts you in a good position. So those are some of my ideas. Really, at its core, I think the thing to keep in mind when you're writing and you're planning these encounters is what do the villains, what do the enemies care about? What are they trying to accomplish? Because that's really going to give you that wiggle room that you need to be able to spin off a defeat into a continuation of a story instead of a total loss or a complete reset on the entire game. It's keeping in mind goals, objectives, why a character or an enemy or an opponent is going to act the way they do, and then just kind of executing on that. So but yeah, so that's my thoughts. Great topic, honestly. I think about this a lot. I just in terms of game designing and running games, how you can kind of make these kinds of scenarios interesting. I will occasionally throw out that supposed to lose battle. JRPGs, I think, are a lot more fond of it than Western RPGs, but you'll come up against something that's just completely overwhelmingly powerful, and it's pretty clear that they're not really supposed to win this fight. In Valor, I would usually recommend being about 5 levels above. That's a pretty clear indicator that someone's completely outmatched. But yeah, so defeat. This definitely does not have to be the end. Definitely, even improvisationally, there are a lot of steps you can take to kind of save the party if things go awry, and you can think about who might help them out, or is this guy really going to stick around and make sure everyone's dead, or is he going to move on to whatever it was they were trying to do. So yeah, lots of options. So with that, let's talk about giant robots. So this is currently up on our Discord server. I guess I can talk a bit about that since I'm mulling over changes and how I want to handle this. Currently, our early release content that is not available on itch.io is free-ish within our Discord server. So we've set up the test arena where people can come in and they can test. My ideal is that folks who are in the test arena will kind of set up their games to test the content in there and report back. In order to access it, you have to sign an NDA basically with us. So you need to print and sign something and send it back. I know doing that is tricky for people, and our NDA it's a contract. It's got a lot of scary language in it. So for a lot of folks, that can be kind of a hard sell, we'll say. But that in mind, you can. I'm considering making it so that, and I just realized that my Twitter handle isn't displaying, so let's fix that. But yeah, so probably going to change that, especially because I have this stream now where I can talk about these things. So I can, roll out this mecha thing, and then I can make this publicly available, since it's not at a point where I'm selling it. I just want early test data. So anyone who's in the Discord server can just pick it up and use it, and then report back, and with that, no NDA or anything like that. Probably I'll split this off into a public document. The last big one that's on the server currently is our foes book, and that book is a lot more complete, but I need to update it to a certain format, and I'm going to release it at probably about a $10 price point. Since once I get it polished up a bit, it's basically ready to go. It just needs art and layout, and because this book is 450 or so pages, that's enormously expensive. But that's a project I'm working on trying to get figured out. But so that aside, giant robots. As said, Valor and Mecha work very well together, as they should. Giant robots are a staple in anime and JRPGs. So with the core system, you can honestly play a certain kind of mecha game without really having to do anything. Like, if you wanted to play either kind of a super robot style, or even some Gundams where, like, you have the core cast and they each have their own Gundam, and they're always in that Gundam, and they're not really using any other mechs or anything like that. It's just, they have this custom Ace Pilot Gundam that's super special. You can do that with the core rules, and that's not really a problem. But if you want to do things like pilot swapping, or combining, excuse me, yawning a bit. Apologize. If you want to do combining robots, if you want to do like battleships, if you want to do giant mechs that you might be fighting on foot, that requires some special rules. Well, maybe that last example, you could just build a master that's a giant mecha, but we'll ignore that factor. So, what am I doing with the Valor Mecha? My goal here, and our initial rules, basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set some stat baselines for how these things are supposed to function. So kind of our approach here is I've divided them into two categories, mechs and armors. Mechs are your giant robots. So this is your Gundam, your, Gao Gaigar, your Gurren Lagann. These are giant robots that you cannot conceivably fight on foot. Well, I guess Gurren Lagann, in the initial stages, you could fight on foot, but ignore that. Gundam, though, definitely not something that you're intended to fight with your bare hands or with terrestrial weapons. Is like, these things are huge and they will mess you up. If you're using the mech rules, generally the mechs will have enormously inflated stats, which we'll see, and They are meant to represent, just the big giant robot combat. Armors, on the other hand, are mechs that you kind of can fight on foot. So examples of this would be something like the Gymelis in the Escaflowne series, which you see in like the first episode where Balgus, the stalwart captain of the guard, just fights them with a sword that's bigger than he is, and it's super rad. Because the Gymelis are smaller, they are more armor-like in construction, even in how they're controlled and all of that. There's something that you could conceivably fight on foot. It would just be at a massive disadvantage. Also in that realm, kind of going back to the Trails series of the Panzer Soldats, where they're big, but they're not overwhelmingly huge, and you do occasionally fight them on foot, up until you get the more mech based mechanics. Then, like as the main character gets his mecha, and in the later games where you get where you get your own Panzer Soldats to use, you can kind of start to do the mech versus mech battles, but you'll also still occasionally have to fight one of these things while your party's on foot. The intent with armors is, in terms of raw stats, they'll be kind of in the ballpark of a boss. Damage should be a bit higher, but they won't be necessarily attacking twice all the time. And because of that, really, if you're fighting an enemy in an armor, you're probably going to need your full party. But it's something that's overcomable, and it's something you can do. So, kind of the first goal there was to make that dichotomy. Oh, I should mention too, if folks are hanging out in chat, feel free to ask questions as we go. As always, I'm happy to answer them as they come up. But yeah, so that's the dichotomy. Mecha can't fight on foot. Armors can't fight on foot. So from there, we're really looking at stat distribution. Now, one of the big purposes of this kind of a system is to accomplish something that the core Valor system can't do, which is the idea of a pilot being distinct from a mech and being able to switch between different mechs with different performance and output, but still kind of retaining that base of who this character is and how they bring those strengths to the table. So, also trying to make it as little complication as possible. So in the case of mechs, and then armors will use the same base mechanic. You don't have all of the stats, right? So a mech will have its own health, its own stamina, its own move, defense, resistance, and initiative. And because of this, those stats for the pilot do not matter. They'll just be overridden by the mech. But the pilot is always going to be rolling off of their own active attributes, and the pilot's own attack stat is still going to be factored into the mech's capabilities. I think that's very important, since the idea of a hero being forced out of, their main mecha and forced to make do with like a grunt mech, that pilot being this cool ace will still completely outstrip your regular, flunky types who also can pilot these mechs but are just, cannon fodder. But they will still be at a disadvantage in this other mech because it's not theirs. It's not customized to their capabilities. So, they're just kind of working with what they've got. A scene that comes to mind is in Gundam Wing, where I think it was Hito, the main character, Hito Yui, is out of Wing Gundam and has to pick up like a Taurus, I think it is, It might have been duo, or it might have been both of them. Those two were always getting into trouble together. But they're still able to thrash a lot of the basic flunky type pilots, right? Because they're better. But they're still like they struggle in it, and they're still trying to get back to their main Gundam, since that's what they're good at. That's what they know how to use. That's where they're going to be the most effective. So the core concept behind the mechs are you use your own active attributes to roll. That is purely the pilot's skill. The mech overrides your health and your stamina, and you'll see here, health value wise, enormously inflated. Mechs have 10 times the health of a normal character. Fun fact: these numbers are reflective of what Valor originally looked like before we deflated them down to make them less absurd. Because one of our core tenets is bigger numbers is exciting, but just due to all of the math and all of that, we determined that to make it look less intimidating, probably don't need that extra 10 multiplier on top of it. But it's back now, because Mecha, you do want that. It's the feel, right? Mecha are huge, they're powerful. That should be represented by bonkers numbers. So here you go. A mech's base health is 50, gains 100 health, or 500, excuse me, gains 100 health per level, and then 50 health per health upgrade point. So let's talk upgrade points. So this is a new kind of currency where you can, instead of raising your primary stats, you instead sink upgrade points into various stats. So you can kind of tweak how you want these stats to go, and then by extension, that will kind of determine what this mech is good at. So for regular mecha, you get 50 upgrade points, and then you get another 6 points every level. Mecha do go off of a level system. Eventually, as we build out the system, we'll discuss more ways to kind of make it a bit more point buy, or make it less level dependent and more kind of like, oh, I'm upgrading this thing piecemeal. But just for simplicity, the core system, we're using that level, the level package. It fits with the core Valor feel. Once we get that established, then I'll look at some deviations. So yeah, 50 upgrade points to start, and then you get 6 upgrade points every level. This should, based on the stats that the mechs do retain, this should put you in reasonable parity with the process of leveling up a character normally in Valor. The idea here being that one upgrade point is roughly equivalent to a single stat up, and from here you can just kind of customize it how you want. So you can just sink a bunch of points into health or into the max stamina. And I do have a recommendation here that you can change stamina to power or energy. I'm just keeping our terminology static so that it's easy to understand. But it would likely if we publish an official campaign, that term stamina would not be retained for the mech's power source. We would use something else. But yeah, so you can pump the defense, pump the resistance, pump the move, pump the initiative. I'm really hoping we can get some folks in to fire test these rules. I'm going to move this into a public document probably after stream. If not after stream, then like tomorrow or after I figure some stuff out. So this should, if you're in the Discord, just be available to everybody. But at this point, I am not I'm not putting an upward limit on the maximum amount of upgrade points you can put into a stat. I suspect that will change, just depending on how it goes. But we'll see. So you can kind of upgrade your initiative, you can upgrade your move, boost resistance, defense, health, stamina. Since it's all kind of defensive, power source, and then speed, I feel like this should more or less balance it out, but I've yet to see the degree of min-maxing that folks will put into this. So currently, points are not limited, and if messing around with that really appeals to you, now's the time to try it, because I expect there will be some limitations on this in the final build. But yeah, so that's max. Armors, on the other hand, are actually giving you a bonus to your stats. And the way that this works out is you get in the armor, and then it gives you more health. It gives you more stamina. It basically is an attachment that you wear. And in this case, the mechs also have their own attack stats, so they can boost your attack as well. So you've got a damage factor. You'll see here that the armors actually get more upgrade points than the mechs do, because you are also upgrading that attack stat, and you are giving yourself boost to your attack to get your damage kind of to that level where if you jump into mecha, you'll still have kind of that balanced combat experience. Once again, highly experimental, so we'll see what people do with the system. I want to be able to give a bit more freedom with how you tinker your stats, but I absolutely acknowledge that it may get busted very quickly. So we'll see how that goes, and if it looks like just intense min-maxing to one-shot someone is the order of the day, there will be some hard caps on how much you can boost a single stat based on your level. But we'll see. I want you guys to be able to have fun with it. I'd like this to be a bit more customizable. Since we're not using the core attribute system, I'd love to be able to just let you tweak your stats a bit more. It kind of gets us back to our roots. I've talked about this in some of the streams we did for Gen Con. We actually, a lot of our core mechanics started with the Super Robot Wars tactical RPG games, where they're Japan-only releases, although there are actually English releases you can import now. I think they're for the Southeast Asian regions. I've imported everyone in English since they started doing that. It's great. I love this big, dumb, bombastic series, but a lot of their approach and their mechanics were the initial inspiration to Valor. And one of their big conceits is you can just kind of upgrade your mechs by like boosting their health, or boosting their armor, boosting their evasion or accuracy. Typically, you'll want to balance it all because you get special rewards for super boosting certain mechs to a certain point. But I like that idea. I want to see if I can kind of carry that forward into Valor, which even today we share a lot of DNA with the Super Robot Wars series. It's if you've ever played one of those games, and you just look at it and you look at Valor, you can tell there was a lot of inspiration there. So for the mechs, the kind of that big thing is boosting you, and typically, based on how this is going to go, likely the mech will functionally double-ish your capabilities. You'll see like mechs actually give a boost to your initiative too, among other things. They'll boost your movement, but in this case they don't have a base initiative or base movement. It's just something that they add on top of that. So it gives you options, right? You can build a super speedy mech or armor. You can build some big, slow, ponderous tank. And in the armor category, you can build something that just does scabs damage. Lots of things you can do, lots of options you can play with. And I'm eager to see what comes of it once players get their hands on it. I know all of our playtests, especially the early Valor playtests, were a lot of fun, and people broke the hell out of the system. And honestly, that's kind of exciting in its own right. You weep for all the work you've done that's just been invalidated or will need to be fixed, but uh, also it's hilarious that this person managed to build a hellish doom portal and like suck people into zones of damage, and also create this summon that pushes him around like a chariot. That's fun. And that's honestly in my eyes a fun part of the development process is getting to getting to put something out there and seeing how people just rip it apart. But also just seeing some of the absurdity that comes out of it in these early playtests where you haven't really solidified your rules. That's exciting too. Both in the oops, I didn't think about that, and also in the oh man, I can't believe that you were able to do that. Which in some cases, honestly, leads to that possible exploit or whatever just staying in the game because it's really cool. A lot of examples of that in Valor, definitely. But as I mentioned, this is the very basic mecha build right now, and these rules very much need that fire test, and that they are at a very early point, and we don't know how these are going to work. So, excuse me, very tired today apparently. So we don't know how these are going to work. They're based off of the balanced principles of the core Valor system, so they should at least kind of work, but we'll see. But yeah, so techniques. The big thing with mechs is mechs have their own techniques. I don't have them down yet, but one of the skills that pilots will be able to take are ways to use some of their personal techniques even when they're inside of their mechs and to scale them up. One of the things I always think about from the Gundam 00 series is the Setsuna's rival character, Graham Acre, who is this ace pilot who he has the Graham Acre special or whatever he calls it, which is this kind of high-speed maneuver that he's really good at, and it demonstrates his skill, and it's something that he can take with him to other mechs. So being able to retain that is important to me. Not in the rules yet, but we'll get there. One of the big things with the mech and the armor techniques is we did give them kind of their own special cores. A lot of cores should function normally for mechs and armor. Like, boosts and weekends are going to just play out the same. You just, in this case, you gotta scale up the skills, and because mechs will have their own special skills that will, in effect, be scaled up versions of that as I get into the skill point system for mechs. There will be a lot of that. But techniques are kind of the big bread and butter, and like mechs typically have their own unique techniques. In some cases, if you're using like your basic mech, it might just be that this thing has like a chain gun and a vibro knife and maybe some missiles or whatever. But once you get into like those custom ace mechs that honestly I would expect most player characters to be in, because that's what's fun and exciting about a mecha series. You're gonna want your own custom techniques with like your blazing swords or fingers or whatever. And we want to make sure that you can do that just as you can with your basic on-foot characters. The mech damage core, the armor damage core are basically just inflated. Something I do want to point out too, mechs and armors both do have a doubled stamina cost. For armors, because you are gaining a bonus to your stamina, basically that boost will carry forward. But why do mechs have that? Let's talk about that. One of the things I want to be able to achieve is having a high stamina character be able to fuel their own mech, but at cost. So a skill that is going to exist in this book, it doesn't exist currently, but these are the plans I'm laying. If you are in a mech, the mech has double stamina, so its inherent value of that is it is optimized to use these techniques. A character could take a skill where they can burn their own personal stamina to boost the mech. Give their stamina to the mech for the mech to use as energy, but everything costs more, right? So it's harder to do that. So that's why the values for both the mechs and the armors and the techniques are all doubled. For armors, it pretty much doesn't matter because the armor is boosting your stamina anyway, so it should wash. For the mechs, they just have a inherent double stamina, but you can potentially, as a pilot, fuel it yourself a bit further, and that comes with its own interesting possibilities. So that's why that's like that. But pretty basic, because mechs are basically all times 10 stats. The mech damage core is times 10. You'll also note that your pilot, your attack stat as a pilot, just carries directly over to a mech, but you multiply it by 10. In this case, I wanted to keep that aspect because it's the idea that the pilot is good with certain kinds of weapons, and when they're in the mech, though that weapon choice is going to carry over. So, if Duo Maxwell, who is, the Death Scythe, his thing is agility, right? He uses this big laser scythe and flies around and it, has cloaking and speed and whatever, and it's awesome. And if he gets put into one of those clunky, I think they were called cancers or something, those underwater crab mecha, not really playing to his strengths. So, he's not going to be able to use it nearly as well. He's going to struggle, and that is just not going to be a great look for him. But, he can do it. He can kind of figure it out. So that's why that attack stat carries over. Armors, you can see it's just a straight double here. And then you'll see the values carried over with repair cores replacing the healing. I am considering making the repairs temporary until end of scene. This is also a optional rule I'm looking at for Tools of the Trade, where healing techniques just are not permanent. Just to keep in some of the fields. But definitely for Mecha, the idea of making spot repairs on these giant and complex robots and having it keep through, especially as I work into repair times and things like that, since I do want to treat these like machines that require complex maintenance, might not really fit that you can just use your healing core to heal it, and that healing will take throughout. So that's something that we'll have to, that's a bridge we'll cross a bit later. But yeah, for now, functionally just doubled values. They fairly simple, and you can see kind of the stamina cost is double too. So yeah, but that's the basics. With these rules as they exist, you can kind of start building mechs. You can sort of see how they interact with pilots, and you can kind of start testing for that. A lot of the cores, you can just kind of use skills and abilities that already exist and just plug them in, and you should be able to have, the mech battles that you want. I need data on this, so if there are people who really want to test giant robots, I'm going to try and make this publicly available now that I've covered it. Yeah, go nuts if you want. I've got a bit of time left. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes left in the stream for questions. So I'll give a bit of a moment for chat if folks are watching and want to ask about Mecha Rules or what we're looking to do. But otherwise, if I'm not seeing any questions, I'm probably just gonna cut it here, and we will be back on Tuesday. So that will be the 17th. And as to topic, I'm probably going to go a bit more directly into, into the nation of Amaster in the Valor live play. Possibly also talk about the city of Calibri, um, depending on how things go. So that's the tentative plan for the next stream. Otherwise, have a good night. As I'm not seeing any questions, I'm just going to go ahead and cut us here. That is Mecha. That should be available more openly for the Discord server soon. And yeah, I very much would love some data if people want to just tweak with things, mess with it. I don't expect I'm going to do too much more on this because I really have been putting off converting the foes book into getting it off out of NBA land and getting it actually publicly available so people can just pick it up in its unfinished but still reasonably complete state. So I just got to format it. I may not, upon initial release, have all of the faux bios ready. And there's some things I'm going to have to do, like I'm going to have to reset the dragons because I've actually got dragons to the lore, and I'm kind of moving the foes book into a more Valorous specific position. So I'll have to do lore for a lot of these things, which may not happen in the initial release, but I want to get this thing out. So hopefully that will come a bit later this month. But yeah, until then, I'll catch you all later, and that was Mecha. So yeah, head into the Discord, try out the rules, and let me know what you think. Alright, bye guys.